So as you heard, I'm a data librarian. I'm probably just going to deal with a few of the dots that was in Dr. Bhattacharya's talk on the wider scholarly communications, but you'll hear some echoes, some overlap, because I'm focusing on research data management. And I titled my talk Research Data Support because at University of Edinburgh with our service, we kind of say it's actually the researcher's job to do the research data management. That's their area. It's part of their research integrity, and it's our job to provide the support and the facilities for them to do that well. So that's why I've titled my talk that way, and it's really, I compliment the organizers of the conference to be focused on the future of libraries. It's quite a challenging and intriguing thing to think about as you're preparing a conference presentation. So I guess I submit that maybe research data support could be one major growth area for academic libraries, and I hope the public librarians who are here will also find some aspects of the talk that's useful for them as well. So I was just trying to get myself inspired on the future of libraries, and I really liked this this image from a blog post, and not least because it has people doing meditation and yoga in the library, which I don't know if you do that in India, but in my fantasy you do. So, and of course we'd like to do it in the UK. And by the way, you can probably hear from my accent that I'm an American originally, so I'm sure they've got that happening in the US as well. Also before I leave this slide, it was interesting to hear the inaugural presentation about different perspectives from representatives in IIMB about what the future of libraries entails. And I think I remember Professor Oja was speaking about maybe the future of libraries is really that it will be an IT center with a library attached. And I hope that by the end of my talk you'll be thinking that the future library will maybe an IT center, but it'll be led by librarians if it is. So open science is how I decided to begin my talk as a way into this field of research data support or research data management. So that's where the main overlap will be with the previous talk. And that's because I think anyone entering this now is going to see open science as the main lever, the main driver for research data management. Although at University of Edinburgh we were kind of doing this on the early side, and at that, so 2011 we passed our research data management policy, and I think the drivers were a little bit different then. There wasn't quite such an emphasis on open, although it was obviously there and it was getting stronger, which is a good trend. That means it's going to get stronger still, if that's the case. And I think the drivers then were more about research integrity and research efficiency, especially from the point of view of the funders who wanted to make sure that they were getting value for money for the research they funded, and in some cases not funding the same research over and over again if the data wasn't shared. Let's see. So then I'm going to try to move on to using the examples I'm familiar with in UK higher education institutions, how research data management policy and research data management policy and the culture change that Dr. Bhattacharya was talking about that is needed, libraries can play a big part in leading on that, and I'll try to speak to how that is the case. Of course, there are some things out of our control, but there are other things that we can and has been shown to be the case where we're taking the lead. And then I'll go into some service examples, basically from my university. I'm a practitioner, not an academic, so I'm most in my comfort zone talking about what we do, but I didn't want to only talk about what we do because I want to try and make it relevant to this conference theme. And then at the end, I'm just going to touch on skills again, the changing skills and priorities for academic libraries to be able to adapt. So just a review for you now that you've heard all about open science, really. This is from Foster, which is a great source for online learning materials. This is their What is Open Science training course. This is just an image from there. They talk about the 4 pillars of open science: data, code, papers. I probably would have put papers first because that's always been the pillar of science and scholarship, but papers is open access papers and reviews, changing the nature of reviews, as we just heard, to be more open type of reviews and not based on, I think along with reviews, you get the idea of changing metrics. And so drilling down a little bit more, similar to those 4 pillars, you could have open source, referring to software, open data, open access, and open notebook science, which is one way of talking about being very open with your methodology while you're doing the research, not just having the outputs of your research published afterwards. So some transparency, the idea of finding out who might be the fellow collaborators, who could have comments on your data as we were just hearing the stories. Also focus on public availability, research and data as a public good, largely funded by public funds through research funding. Focus on reusability, replication, reproducibility of scientific data, and also access, public access, open access to all of these things. That's partly because the public has the right to access it. It's also partly to build trust in science and scholarship. Is the public sure that their money is being put to good use through this funding of research? Certainly in my countries, UK and US, we've seen quite a backlash against experts lately, and so it's clear that the academics need to be rewarded to do this, but they also do need to reach the public with their the importance of what they're doing. So impact is becoming quite an important aspect, and scientific communication as a whole. And for some people, open science is all about using web-based tools to facilitate scientific collaboration, open science framework, and all kinds of little app. What's your favorite app? What tool works for you? Everybody has one. And for some people, open science is the sum total of all those open tools. So that's from a blog post, and I stole that slide from my colleague, so I thought I should put his name on it. And sometimes you see open science as an umbrella, and then it maybe points out most of the things we've been talking about, and maybe a couple of more. The citizen science, for example, the idea that the public takes part in science in a meaningful way, which can happen through global platforms and the web. And kind of drilling back down into data, we really have to pay attention to this notion of FAIR now. It's really taken off. It's been around for a few years, but once the funders get a hold of it, then it becomes more like gospel. So it's findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. I guess I should go over here by the big screen so I don't turn my back to you to read the slides. So findable is kind of the main thing, really, making data discoverable. This is why we advise researchers to put their data in a repository, not just put it up on their own website, so that it can have the metadata and the type of technology, the type of findability through search engines like Google and Google Scholar. And librarians can quality assure that metadata to make sure that it will be findable. Accessible, it's no problem if it's open. There's many levels of access if it can't quite be open, and you have some sensitive nature of the data, and you have to in some way manage access. Interoperable is a big ask. We have a long way to go for a lot of things on that, where the whole data set is interoperable with other data sets. But there's other ways of looking at that in terms of making the metadata interoperable. Researchers getting an ORCID or an ORCID and having that in the metadata so people can quickly find out what else they've published. Linking to publications, linking to the research projects, that's all part of being interoperable. And of course, reusable. And in some cases, it's about reusing the data for a whole nother topic altogether. People finding data from different disciplines and putting them, like a mashup for different uses, or it may be replicating that same study in another setting, or just simply, can you reproduce this study, which isn't always the case, unfortunately. So for people who like pictures, this is fair again, but just with pictures. So whenever we train our researchers about research data management, similar to the workshop I'll be giving tomorrow, we always focus on the benefits for you, the benefits for the researcher. But the kind of impetus towards open data comes from many directions. On the public side, often represented by the funders, there's, as I said, the efficiency aspect. There's opportunities for citizen science, as we mentioned, economic benefits for the private sector. Sometimes researchers don't like making their data available for other people to get rich on, but it is part of the bigger picture. The researchers are meant to do research, and other people are meant to get rich on it, if that's at all possible, probably by bringing many different data sources together. I mentioned public trust in science, and we've already talked about the need to validate the data in research papers. We have had a lot of instances of fraud, is the other thing I didn't say earlier, that has shaken trust in science, for example. And on the right-hand side, the research community benefits. This is the part about sharing for your peers. Like when you tell your toddler it's good to share because let someone else play with the toy now. The toddler cries because they don't want to give it up. There's surveys showing that researchers like the idea of data sharing when it's the part of sharing where they're reusing the data, not so much when they're the ones sharing. But it does enable these effects, community effects, that makes new research possible, interdisciplinary research, some of the major, what do they call them, global grand challenges for research, such as climate change, solving poverty. These things can't be done by one discipline alone, so we need researchers to work together. And of course, there are benefits for the researcher. There's career recognition is coming. They're not getting a lot of it for data right now, but it's certainly, there are bits of evidence, such as if you make your data openly available, your papers do get cited more. There's a possibility of finding new collaborations, opening up your world to a broader world, to be part of a bigger research community, and citations, and hopefully people will be getting more credit for data. We've heard about changing citation to more like a feature film kind of citation, where you would have a whole bunch of contributors to a large research project that would include the data specialists. But not all data can be open, as I mentioned before. So the European Union has cottoned onto this phrase, as open as possible, as closed as necessary. So this infographic here is pointing out the results of their pilot which has now gone, they've rolled out to the whole community. Whenever a researcher applies for a Horizon 2020 grant, they have to make their data open, or they need to say why they're opting out of that. And what they found is it was either for reasons of privacy, such as the human subject data, intellectual property rights because they're making use of data where they don't have the permission to share it, or it might jeopardize the project's main objective. I find that a little bit open to scrutiny, but maybe you have better ideas about why that would be the case. I think it's also, if this is the first time many researchers have had to share because of a funder's request, I think they just need to get used to the idea. In my experience, once someone shares their data once, they're pretty open to doing it again. So how can research libraries drive culture change for academics? That's a tall order. And something that's come out recently that I take inspiration from is the LIBR 2018-22 strategy. LIBR being, I don't know what it stands for offhand, but it is European Library Organization. So what I like about this graphic is the interlocking circles. It doesn't have data at the center or anything like that, but data is kind of woven throughout if you think about it. We've already heard how open data is a big part of how scholarly communication is changing. It's obviously part of research infrastructure. That's why we need such big computers and platforms, is to process this data. And also, from a research library point of view, the need to focus on skills, changing skills for librarians, and also helping researchers to change their skills. Because we've all been around for a while, and this technology is changing so fast, everybody needs to upskill. So let's see. So some of these things on the right are the main points of the strategy. And as you can see, fair data is one of the big things. And yeah, cultural heritage as well. It's not just science. The term open science is, we think it comes because of the German word Wissenschaft, which means kind of science and knowledge and scholarship. So often it's substituted with open research to be more inclusive of the humanities. It's not intended to leave the humanities out. Okay, so my view on how librarians can help kind of lead the change. One thing is, as we've seen, research data management isn't just about naming your files well and keeping track of your files so you don't lose it by the end of your project. Those are good skills to have. But it's also about changing a paradigm where you're expected at the end of your research project to share your data to make it fair. So librarians are obviously a big part of that, even if they're not doing the hands-on data analysis type of thing. But culture change can't be forced, and certainly academic norms are resistant to change because they're so long-lived and they're passed down from one generation to another. So even the younger people who might be used to sharing things on Facebook, if they're learning from their mentor, don't share that or it'll jeopardize your career, you can bet they're going to listen to them. So the higher education institutions need to create policies to start a top-down process as well as a bottom-up desire to share. And that's what we found at Edinburgh. We really needed both to make a change. And the policy is responding to pressure from funders, publishers, the public, and in some cases laws, Freedom of Information or General Data Protection Act regulation, that kind of thing in Europe. How can librarians lead their institutions if their job is to provide support? I think a lot of librarians feel, disempowered in this area, and I'm not sure it's justified because When we started training our librarians in research data management, one of the things we did was have them go interview a researcher and sit down with them for an hour and find out about their data. And inevitably, that was a confidence builder for the librarian, even though they might have been very kind of scared to do that in the first instance. But when a librarian sits down with a researcher, you very quickly find out the knowledge that you have as a librarian, and where the researchers doesn't necessarily have that knowledge. They have their domain knowledge. They don't necessarily know what DOIs are for in digital object identifiers. They don't know how to create metadata. They might not care either, but they can at least recognize your expertise, and you can recognize each other's expertise and become collaborators in this new space rather than having to depend on knowing it beforehand. So I'm kind of anticipating my slide here. So what you can do to get started is just be very user-centric with your support. You do want to make friends with the academics. You don't just want to go in there and say, you need to change, you need to change. So by being there as a support for these researchers who are also feeling all these new pressures, showing that the library can support this area when they maybe thought there was no one who could support them in these changes, then you can start changing their minds and getting these, especially scientific researchers who maybe feel they don't have a lot of value for the library, that actually the new way of doing librarianship is for them. So researchers are suffering from information overload these days, data deluge, as well as having to read all these research papers to stay on top. So they're lacking the skills in filtering. Librarians can help with that on the information side. It's similar on the data side, and that's what research data management is for. It's not rocket science. You can learn research data management and start teaching those skills to PhD students so that they can make the best use of their time. And you can save the time of the user, as someone famous once said. Professor Ranganathan. So start by finding research data management champions, data champions who are interested in this new open science kind of world, academics, early adopters around your campus that you can pilot new services with, and you can evaluate how that goes. You can learn lessons from it, gather evidence, do a needs assessment so that what you're focusing on is the most relevant for your institution, and focus on advice and guidance first, which you can just teach yourself some things about research data management and start doing mini trainings. If you don't want to be so bold as to call it a training, call it an awareness raising session. And then at some point, you'll find moving your way up this maturity model for research data management services. So this is from Andrew Cox. I have a couple of slides from his recent article. I was trying to find very recent articles to show you because we're talking about the future here and don't want to be too out of date or anything. So I think University of Edinburgh has done pretty well moving its way up, mainly because we've had about 10 years to be doing it. But other people who are starting at the beginning, I know, can be daunting. So as I say, this slide validates what I'm saying about starting with audits and surveys, finding out what the gaps are that your researchers need that you might be able to provide, providing training and advice, web resource guides. That's right in our comfort zone as librarians. We can do that. And then moving your way up to data literacy training, maybe bringing in some data carpentry workshops to your institution. Maybe if you've got the people with skills in data analysis and visualization, you can start providing advanced training that way. And then up at the top, if you've got all the services that are needed for data stewardship, you might run your own data repository. You might provide technical support, provide a catalog of where all the data sets are, and you might have data curators handling the curation and preservation of the data for the institution. So these are some places to get started. I think these are really good advice, and these are all quite recent. The Learn toolkit includes a model policy for your institution. And I did it in slightly, yeah, I was trying to make a segue into policy because to talk about our policy, so I'll do it in the other order. So our policy kind of focuses on preserving data, also so our policy focuses, as I said before, it's the researcher's job to do their research data management. That's partly academic freedom, that's partly because the university doesn't have that many support people to get involved with every research project. But they can come for help, and hopefully they'll be coming for infrastructure, for storage, centralized backed up storage space, the possibility to register their data, and hopefully a policy will include a mandate of sorts. We're kind of soft on mandates, but we definitely highly recommend that everybody does a research data management plan. Now the reason I have this slide is to point out that to the extent we are doing it well, we have a lot of help. And I think one of the lessons that every talk I've heard about research data management at a library talks about collaborating with others around the institution. So on the plus side, it really gets you out of your silo if you're used to only talking to your own colleagues. You go talk to the research support office or IT colleagues, any experts you can find on campus wherever they come from, and just start to have some meetings about what can be done. That's a good way to get started. I'll have to very quickly take you through our services. We have quite a few technical services that make up the research data service. So because people get confused, we try to slot them into this research data life cycle of services that are applicable before the research begins, during the research project, and then after the research project when it's time to archive the data, with training and support throughout. We know researchers will come for help when they need it, not necessarily looking for it in advance. So before, it's all about data management planning. We have sample DMPs. We can help people iterate on a data management plan that needs to pass a research funder. And we use the DMP Online tool. We can customize that tool for our university. That's provided by the Digital Curation Center. And there's templates there. A number of things for research in progress from our typical, from our sort of, our data librarian service from before we started all this, finding and accessing data. We could still do some of that. We work with our IT colleagues to provide central storage. Also, we're developing a sensitive data storage, remote access kind of environment for sensitive data, because we don't want to leave those human subject researchers out just because they have sensitive data. Code versioning. We have an instance of GitLab, but people can use GitHub. It's very well known internationally on the web for free. We have our own version of something like Dropbox, and we're trying to get our own knowledge up about electronic lab notebooks, because if you're a lab, that's a great way to manage your data well. And then we have some archiving services. We have Edinburgh Data Share, which is the open access data repository. And it's been quite successful. We've managed to get some data from all of the different schools around the university, and that really helps with the word of mouth, getting other people to use it. We have a new service. It's taken a long time, and it's probably just as well, because more people got used to sharing their data openly. But we have a data vault when it can't be shared openly, where it's just retained for a certain amount of time. It may be a requirement of the funder, but they have to pay for that, so they have to get their costs back from the funder. And that's becoming very important for us to get the message across, to get your costs back from the funder so that we can do these things for you. And then we have a data asset register through our, the same place where the research publications show up. So ideally, every researcher has their project, their publications, their other outputs, their data sets all linked together and findable through the Edinburgh Research Explorer website. And I don't have time to go into all this, but we do a lot of training and support. We provide online sessions. We do online, we provide some online resources. We do scheduled training. Luckily, I have a team that helps me do this. We can do bespoke training for a specific group. If a certain group, bioinformatics, some particular specialty wants training just for them, we can tailor it to them for any amount of time. We have an annual event called Dealing with Data, which gets the researchers together talking about issues they've had with their data. We have a blog, etc. And just to finish off on the skills aspect, there doesn't seem to be a lot of clarity about what skills are needed for data librarians or for librarians moving into the data realm. I've seen job descriptions that just look totally unrealistic because they're asking for management level things and they're asking for very detailed data analysis abilities, and they're never going to find one person with all those skills. And it makes you wonder what they think they're doing. But in some cases, they just do need more than one person, and that's just a matter of time to see if research data support becomes a growth area and universities start investing in this, hiring more than one person. But even if they can't even afford to hire one person, there are things librarians in existing scholarly communications roles can, of course, do to upskill. So these are some of the skills that might be needed. And this is a sort of a meta survey of different countries and surveys they've done in those different countries to see what they think is important. I guess there's some consensus there. I'm not sure there's a big story there other than what the different skills might be. This I found something a little more punchy in terms of skills, right up to date from Lisa Federer, who surveyed data librarians and people in similar job roles. She was focused more on the medical side, so that might have some bias there, but it was interesting nonetheless. They were asked to rate the relevance of a set of data-related skills and knowledge to their work. And you might be surprised that soft skills were the most highly rated. Personal attributes, such as developing relationships with researchers and faculty, oral communication and presentation skills, teamwork and interpersonal skills, what I was talking about before about building collaborations across the university with other champions, written communication skills, and one-on-one consultation or instruction, the judgment you need when you're helping someone write a data management plan, about what's important and what is less important. The traditional library skills was rated the lowest category needed for this new area. And then on the next page, just rushing to a conclusion here, she found there was sort of two tracks for data librarian jobs. There's data generalists and subject specialists. And she found both of these types of data professionals in her study. And so it's the data generalists that agreed, actually both sides agreed the soft skills were important. But the subject specialists also thought some domain knowledge was also very important. Maybe a subject degree, for example, in bioinformatics if you're doing medical data librarianship, or just knowing the data resources to be able to provide support for data resources. So that's some interesting things there. And I would just wanted to leave you with some ideas if you are thinking of upskilling yourself. Data carpentry was already mentioned. There's data software and library carpentry, which is very good for using those new open tools like R and Python and OpenRefine for cleaning data. Database skills, really good hands-on training that has an international framework, and you can get some support for running one of those trainings in your institution. Free resources like the Foster online training, our own Research Data Mantra course, stands for Research Data Management Training. We also participated with University of North Carolina on a Research Data and Sharing MOOC, Research Data Management and Sharing MOOC. Just Research Data Management is supposed to include the sharing part in its concept, but not everyone knows that, so I made sure we put the word sharing right in the title. And there's a lot of MOOCs out there that you can take advantage of, and especially if you want to try to learn about data science or just data analysis. And when all else fails, you can read a book. That's just one example of one book you might read. And thank you for your time.
Yes, Robin, what happens in a collaborative research? both the institutes are responsible for preserving the data?
What happens with a collaborative search
Research,
and what
So
responsibilities?
who will be responsible for preserving the data?
Are you thinking of a collaborative research across different institutions?
Different institutes, yeah.
Well, the main message is talk about that at the beginning of the research
Yeah,
and don't leave it till the end,
yeah, of
but
course.
so that it falls through the cracks. It doesn't really matter to me which side preserves the data or whether you find a repository outside of both your institutions, as long as hopefully put it in a trusted digital repository that is going to be around for a while and will help make the data discoverable. I think as long as they're talking about that, the whole point is to make up your mind about these things at the beginning of the project, which is what a plan helps for, but there's other ways to plan ahead.
Because
as
if a researcher leaves, then what happens?
well. If a researcher leaves during the research project, or what? So our data vault plan takes into account, well, both data share and data vault take into account the researcher leaving the institution. So if they put their data in the open access data repository with us, it's not really a problem, because wherever they go, it's their it's available open access. They just go onto the website and they can download it all over again. They don't need to keep copies for themselves. But with the data vault, where it has to be restricted access, if the researcher leaves the institution, someone has to inherit the data owner role. And if we don't know who in the department is appropriate, it would have to go to the head of school. And so if there's a request for access, we'll have to, and we're going to get practice with this, we haven't done it yet, but we're going to have to go to that head of school and say, do you want to give access to this data? There's been a request. Or this data has been retained for 10 years, it was paid up front from the researcher, do you want to pay to preserve it longer, or should it be deleted now? So it's kind of new territory for us because of the 10-year thing, but we think the institution should start taking responsibility for data assets, not just the researcher.
Started making kind of contract with the researcher that you can have right for your data, but you have to deposit everything, and institute, university will also own the data. Particularly laboratory data that is owned by the institute or by the, who got the grant. Whatever it is, that contract has to be made in the beginning, and that's the culture is starting, that you talk everything in the beginning.